All right, we are in business. Everybody, it is Jason Sheftel here, and we are going to talk about TikTok today. So, TikTok is not the most important thing in the world, although I am now on the platform, so people should check that out because that's fun. And I'm actually having a lot of fun with TikTok. So, it is cool. And it's not, again, it's not the biggest thing in the world for geopolitics, for the way the world is heading. When you see Ukraine, you think about Taiwan, South China Sea, Tibet, Hong Kong, all of these real issues in the world. TikTok seems smaller, but it is actually something that is really close to everybody's lives. So people know TikTok, they heard about it, it's everywhere. It kind of took over the country by storm during 2020 and 2021. So it's a big story. And the big story a few years ago, back in 2020, I believe, was the US government didn't really like TikTok. And President Trump tried to force a sale and then quickly lost interest in the whole thing, kind of like a lot of other things that he just liked bringing up, but never really had the follow through with. Now that story has been resurrected, right? So back then, it was about trying to force a sale of the U.S. operations of TikTok. TikTok had become really big. A lot of big American tech companies like Facebook and Microsoft were extremely excited about this because this would let them basically take a major successful new tech platform property and just own it, right? So that was really exciting for tech companies that haven't been innovating, but it kind of got all stuck in the weeds and there was supposed to be a deal and then it fell through and then people just basically the news cycle changed and people lost interest. But the real story these days and right now is that Reuters just reported that there is a likely deal about to happen between TikTok and Oracle, where Oracle, which is a big US data storage company, will basically store the US data of TikTok's user base, American user base. That is the gist of the deal. And this deal may not happen. It could fall through for all sorts of reasons, but nobody forced this to come back up. Although there is new US pressure against TikTok and against all sorts of crypto and other tech platforms right now. We're entering a really new world. So people who have been still absorbing a sort of 2010 tech evangelism, cosmopolitan, global tech uniting everything kind of worldview vision, that's all going to fall apart. But in the meantime, this TikTok deal matters because this, even if it doesn't actually happen with Oracle, if something else falls through, it's partially like a political thing, trying to show that there's progress being made. TikTok isn't a threat. Don't come down on us, all that kind of stuff. But the real bigger story is what people are saying about this deal. So if you go to tech news blogs and stuff like that, which I haven't actually kind of done the review of this, but this is the gist of what always happens is you get these sort of tech evangelist type pundits who will say, look at this. This is a new sign of tech balkanization. We're entering a fragmented world of global tech platforms with different nations having different standards and different data regulations and privacy regulations in different companies. And this global vision of a united tech enabled globe is falling apart. Yeah. And the answer is yes. All of that is falling apart. That vision does not work. It didn't work for a million reasons. And it hasn't been really viable, God, since probably the mid 2000s when all the American tech companies were banished from China. That was a pretty big sign that this was never going to happen. And what we are seeing is a world of tech nationalism. This is something that the more internationalist, highly immigrant centered tech industry in the United States and around the world doesn't want to see, right? People who used to be Ukrainian citizens who became hackers and moved all around the globe and entered cybersecurity or entered crypto or entered whatever and basically got an opportunity to join the world economy and the group of extremely elite knowledge workers that are sort of pushing key technologies forward for really, I mean, you could say mankind, you could say whatever you want, to be a part of that. And then to see that whole vision crumble is very difficult. But we need to accept that this is what's happening, right? And we're going to go into it a little bit, but let's just be honest that that vision was always a bit utopian, right? It was always a bit idealistic. It went hand in hand with the idea of globalization, just kind of removing all barriers, removing all borders, making everything possible for everybody and for every country and every person everywhere. And the truth is that ain't going to happen. And any country right now, any person who wants to know why, just look at Russia. Look what's happening to this country right now, where I don't support the war. I think the war in Ukraine is, shouldn't happen. It shouldn't be supported. I don't want there to be a Russian victory, but I'm also looking at more of the broader perspective about what's going on, because there is not going to be a Russian victory, both because it the military has crumbled far more than anyone ever expected. The Russian military is clearly not capable of basic, modern, advanced operations. I mean, this is the thing it's doing, the stuff it's doing in Ukraine right now is where the United States was in the late 70s to the mid 80s. It is a far cry of what everyone thought it was, and a far cry of what the Soviet Union could have been in its military heyday. But that's not really the point here. The point about this is that countries are acting like countries. They're doing what they think is in their interests. And what has happened is that the United States is really coming down on Russia with the hammer, and it's everything. I mean, every country now needs to know that they need their own technological base, right? They need their own capacity to be technologically self-sufficient in everything from finance to defense to communication, right? All the global companies left Russia. They basically got their entire financial system and their potential banks, currency reserves, and everything just expropriated, whatever you want to call it, basically frozen. They're removed from the global financial system. They're removed from and people might not know as well, they're being removed from the global technological system as well. The Boeing planes and the Airbus planes that are in Russia, they won't be serviced or repaired or sent parts. They're not going to function anymore. And it's going to be the same thing for an enormous host of basic social, civilizational, industrial goods and services in the country. They're just not going to function anymore because Russia doesn't have the industry, and it relied on the rest of the world to give it the industry that it needed. Now the world is pulling back, and that country is left with basically nothing, right? So this is one reason why you could say, hey, there's a world of tech nationalism, because if you don't have the technology you need, which really does include finance. Finance is basically a technology industry at this point, although not the best. If you go to the bowels of a really large bank like Barclays or something, you'll see it's not quite as high tech as you imagine. But the point being that you need these technologies if you want to really stand up to other nations. That is where we are in the world right now. We're basically seeing the first financial and technological war we've ever seen. And the reason it hasn't gone fully technological for all sorts of reasons is because there's much more of a capacity for a country like Russia to counterattack the United States, cyber attacks, all that kind of stuff that people are really worried about and should worry about. That is a real thing. But the key thing here is that the world has changed. And what the US is doing with this whole TikTok story, just to tie it back, this is about TikTok. It's about how the US is requiring this company which has become insanely popular, it's imposing a bunch of costs on this company to force it to localize elements of its technological infrastructure into the United States, and to require that the data on American citizens stay in the United States and be basically serviced. I don't know the actual details of this deal because it's not totally there yet, but most likely it'll also be under the control of a third-party data provider or data storage provider like Oracle, where there'll be an American company holding the American data. And this move will antagonize other nations, and it will show that what we're seeing with Russia, what we're seeing in general with the U.S. throwing its weight around, is the way things are now. And it's going to destabilize, global tech platforms and impose costs on them. But that's the world we live in. And here's the crazy thing. This is what China's been doing forever now, right? And so in particular, in the last 4 or 5 years, it has been turning data into another basic economic input. So you have land, labor, capital, and China is basically adding data into that because it needs these giant data pools for what it's trying to do. So it has already turned data into another national asset. And in China, those assets are under state control. So this isn't a sign of the U.S. going its own way. It's a sign of, in a lot of ways, the U.S. responding to the greater authoritarian direction, capacity, and intention of China. And that is, again, just reality. So there is embedded in all of this, and this hope for this, basically for a world that wasn't like this, for a world where you could transfer information all over the place. And what's really weird about all this too is that there's a sense where people are like concerned about the fate of global tech companies like TikTok or Facebook or whatever, when people also really don't like them anymore. There's an odd anachronism in this whole debate. But the key thing is that we are seeing that this world is still one where leverage and heft and power, unfortunately, really matter. And that hasn't gone away. So the key thing here is that the United States is the one basically throwing its weight around. And it's the fallout from this will not be equal. So if you go onto one of these tech websites or whatever, they'll say, oh, here's this TikTok deal soon. Google will have to do the same thing in France, and Facebook will have to do the same thing in Nigeria, and it'll go on and on and on and on. And that's possibly true, but the real truth is that the US has far, far more leverage in this area, in this technological and data area, as it does in basically every other area, in whether it's finance, capital markets, security, all of this. And there's a much deeper question here about why the US has this power that I'm not going to get into now, which I'll probably do a different video on, and the book that I've been working on really goes into it pretty well. But the key thing here is that this isn't an equal playing field. It isn't. And we are trying to pretend like there is this world of all these 190 plus nations is a world of equal, independent nations standing on their own 2 feet and, with their head held high and their dignity contained, right? The problem is that is a vision of democracy, or that's a vision of a democratic world order that doesn't exist. And ironically, this is a creation of the United States in the 20th century, but it isn't the way things are. And you could just see this basically because a country, not even a country, the whole continent of Europe basically doesn't even have a set of real tech platform companies that it could support, right? So there isn't going to be European companies that are going to be experiencing the same cost in the United States because they don't even exist. This is basically a game that's only being played between the United States and China. And the whole way that Europe has been responding has been with the whole data protection laws that it's been doing, which is just to impose costs on everyone. And it's a sad kind of way to try and go about this. And it's a sign that they don't really have the leverage that they want or need or probably think they should have. But that is really just the way it is. The same way that Europe right now requires the United States to enforce a security deterrence on the Soviet Union, on Russia as it invades Ukraine. God, what a hilarious Freudian slip. Basically without the US component of NATO, Russia could just cruise through Moldova, cruise through Poland, cruise through the Baltic states, do all the things that it really wants to do. And it's really only the United States there with its heft that is making something, making a different reality on the ground. Obviously, the Russian incompetence in the military sphere doing its own part, but that is the way it is. And what we're led back to as we look at this deal with TikTok and the balkanization of the tech world that we've been dreaming in. And I've been talking about this for a while now in a couple of videos that during the 2010s, people basically absorbed an internet tech utopianism as a sort of, gospel of prosperity, a sort of progressive vision of the better future. Like without the growth of new tech devices, new tech services and platforms, there was a sense that nothing else was developing in the country, that there was no movement or progress forward into a better future. So people really grabbed onto it and they started to read intensely all of these tech blogs and stuff like that, which is why I bring all this up. But the key thing we need to remember here is that this is just bringing us back to questions about US hegemony, right? Amid an increasingly poor and chaotic and destabilized world. And this is a good question to ask. Why does the US have this leverage? Why is this world going to pieces? Why is there a return to a sort of dark, cloistered, defensive sort of regionalism and antagonism where every country is sort of out for their own interests? These are very important questions to ask. We have to ask why the last 75 years, which seem to be the prelude to a permanently better world, why that didn't work. And these are the real questions we just need to get to. And so talking about TikTok and bemoaning how this is the end of a beautiful era and a sign of bad things to come. Yeah, that's true. But the bad things are here. This time is here, right? This isn't in the future. This is like COVID. The time is now. We are experiencing these changes right now. We're not waiting for them to happen. We don't have time to debate all this and what we think is going to happen. This is just the way it is. And pretending like the world of cosmopolitan tech utopianism is still here, or even that's really be saved because it wasn't viable in the first place, it's just crazy. It's gone. It's not going to come back, and this just isn't the 2010s anymore. We don't live in a world of globetrotting millennial digital nomads. We just don't. And obviously there's remote workers and all this, but we're going to see pretty soon how the social consequences of everything that's going on, not just in the United States, but all around the world, has been so severe. We're going to wake up. We're going to like pull ourselves out of the sleep that we all went into of our own lives and of the basically of COVID, of inflation, of global supply chain ruptures, and now of major wars in Europe and possibly in Asia and in the Middle East. This is the new normal that we're going to be experiencing. And it's one of those things where it is so relentlessly upsetting if we think about it in the wrong way, or if we try and continue with the idealism that we've had, that we really need to look at this idealism itself, think about why we absorbed it so deeply, why it mattered to us so much, and then start to move forward. Because otherwise we're going to start ignoring everything that we see in the news. It's all going to be just horrible. We're all going to become nihilists, and it's going to be, a very angry, mean sort of individualism everywhere. And nobody wants that. But we really have to look back to why we were obsessed with this stuff in the first place. Obviously, we wanted a better world, but what is the world we're entering, right? The world is changing, and tech is changing with it. And it's just good to see that for what it is. It's not good to try and write paeans and poems to the world that could have been, right? We're in the world that is, and that world is happening right now. And it's, it's still the world, right? We don't have to go hope for other places. I mean, we just got to live in the one we're in. So I'll leave it at that. Guys, I hope you learned a little bit about TikTok and these data wars, because this is going to be the new normal. I actually don't think that it's going to matter all that much, because TikTok's a minor thing in the end. Yeah, they have data on you, and yeah, all this kind of stuff, but there's way more important challenges coming down the pipeline. There's way bigger problems for China that are basically here. So it's going to be a minor story in the end. And the shrinkage of a lot of these global tech companies in general in the coming years, as the results of the way things are going to play out in the global system, this is going to naturally end a lot of this conversation. But we're still in the early phases of all this. So I hope that was a good primer on some of the stuff going on. And if you enjoyed this video, even though I have a raspy voice, please like it. Please subscribe, share it to everybody you know, throw on notifications to learn more about the crazy events going on all around us. And with that, I will see you